Recording. Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diana Schulak. I am the program manager at Family Focus Resource Center. We are a nonprofit agency affiliated with Cal State University Northridge, California Department of Education, and North LA County Regional Center. And we are here to help families that have children with disabilities. We have four offices, one at Cal State Northridge, Chatsworth, Santa Clarita, and Antelope Valley. So I will make sure to give you all our contact information at the conclusion of this workshop. Today we have with us Senior Attorney Maria Iriarte from Disability Rights California, and they will be presenting IHSS Basics Part 1. This is a four-part series. We will have the second part on Monday, June 10th. I can't believe it's already June, at 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Maria or Raymond or Lonnie, one or the other.
Thank you. I'll take it from here.
Thank you, Raymond.
So my name is Raymond Kwong. I'm an advocate with Disability Rights California. Just real quick about our agency. We're a statewide nonprofit, and we provide free legal services to people with disabilities with any disability-related issues. So we have offices statewide, with our headquarters being in Sacramento. And our attorneys and advocates can help with a variety of issues, from access or discrimination issues of housing, transportation, employment, reasonable accommodation issues, special education and higher education. We can also help with public health benefits such as in-home supportive services, Medi-Cal, Social Security overpayment issues. And within, excuse me, and within our agency, we also have separate programs such as Office of Client Rights Advocacy, or OCRA, that specializes in helping clients at the regional center, and our client assistant program that specializes in helping clients at the Department of Rehab. As our host said, we will do questions and answer at the end of the presentation, and you will be receiving the presentation material you see on screen now, and any links you see in the chat after the presentation. If you'd like to speak to one of our advocates, a private appointment, you can give us a call. The numbers in the chat is 800-776-5746. So without further ado, Maria, please take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being flexible with the time. I appreciate you guys being here, and Family Focus allowing us to do it this afternoon. So today I'm gonna share a lot of information, but I don't want you to worry about the amount of information you're going to get, because you're getting all of the material. And so if you have any questions, you could ask them after the training. If you have further questions or you want to talk about your case specifically, you could always call us. So I'm going to talk about applying for IHSS. I'm going to talk about the different categories of services that IHSS provides, why a self-assessment is really important. And then I'm going to talk about specific services like protective supervision, paramedical services. Then I'm going to end the conversation on services, and then we're going to talk about things that affect hours that people are given, including what IHSS program they put you under, whether hours are being prorated, whether you have an alternative resource. Then that ends, and then we're going to talk about some of the tools that the social workers use when they're trying to figure out how much time to give you. So we'll look at some of those tools. And recently there was the elimination of the provider eligibility requirements for minors. So in order to be a parent provider of a minor child, or a non-parent provider of a minor child, you had to meet certain requirements. Well, that was done away with for the most part, and we'll talk about that. And I'll give you the actual letter that was issued by the California Department of Social Services, which is the state agency that administers the IHSS program statewide. We're going to look at a notice of action, and I'm going to talk about aid paid pending and appeals. And then as far as resources, all of the IHSS forms are online. You don't have to wait for the social worker to send you the form. You can actually look it up. And so this first link will take you to the IHSS forms, and they typically start with SOC. So SOC and then whatever the number of the form is. And as we go through some of the forms today, you'll see what I'm talking about. All of the regulations, these are the rules for the IHSS program, are found in this link right here. So if you were to open it up, I can show you that. I'm going to open up the link. I have to stop sharing in order to open up the link. So I just opened up the link, and the regulations are called Manual of Policy and Procedures, or MPPs, and the regulations for the IHSS program start at 30-700. So if we open this up, the first part of the regulations provides definitions, special definitions, quality assurance and quality improvement programs. That's where, for example, IHSS social worker could show up unannounced to see what's going on, the healthcare certification, which is important to start the process. Need application process, responsibilities, needs assessment standards, cost limitations, eligibility. There's a lot of information here. And then what follows are the MPPs. And so, for example, MPP 30-700.1 describes the IHSS programs as providing assistance to eligible aged, blind, or disabled people who are unable to safely remain in their homes without assistance. So IHSS is an alternative to out-of-home care. In order to apply for IHSS, you have to have Medi-Cal. If you don't have Medi-Cal, you cannot apply for IHSS because IHSS is a service, is a Medi-Cal service. And so this service, like other services that is under the Medi-Cal umbrella, like home and community-based waivers, are to provide people with assistance at home so that they don't have to go, for example, into a nursing home, which is what Medi-Cal will pay for. Sometimes Medi-Cal will pay for nursing care at home, but you would have to be on a waiver that allows you to get that service. So anyway, so there's a lot of information here. Anything you need to know about the program will most likely be in the regulations. So I wanted to show you how to access that information. So if we go back to the material, we have a manual. So if you go on it, this is Disability Rights California. We have a manual, an IHSS manual. It is a really good manual. And we have other IHSS publications. So if you go to our website and you go to resources, and you go to the section that says IHSS, you'll find our manual and other publications on very specific topics. Assessing people while they're in an institution. Yes, the county has the obligation to assess someone who's coming out of say a nursing home or a hospital, and they need IHSS at home. And so there's a process for that. I remember in the old days hearing people call us and they would say that, you know, they called the IHSS program to get someone to come out and assess them, and the IHSS social worker would say, no, we can't assess you while you're in your nursing home or while you're in the hospital. That's not true. Yes, they have an obligation to do that. Clarification about the need for a social security number or TIN number. The new parent, non-parent provider rules are here. We're going to go through it. And then some of the tools are in this document here, and we're going to look at some of those tools today. There are two ways that providers get paid. One is they submit the timesheet and down the line they get paid. The other way is through what is called advance pay. Advance pay is available for people who are considered under the program to be severely disabled, and we'll go through the definition for that. So if you're considered severely disabled, you can ask for advance pay. And what that means is that the program will send the IHSS recipient money. And then when the 1st of the month comes or the 15th of the month comes, the IHSS recipient will make a check out to the provider. Why do they do that? Because these are people with high needs, and the program doesn't want them to lose their providers because the providers are unwilling to wait to get paid. IHSS for children in the adoption assistance and foster care settings. We've got an all-county letter about that. Sponsor deeming and the IHSS eligibility no longer happening. There's no proration for protective supervision. I'll go. That's the publication, but I'm going to talk about proration and clarifying the definition of in the home, because in-home supported services, right? It means you're going to get services in the home. What is considered a home? Is a shelter considered a home? Perhaps. There are many situations that could be considered quote unquote a home. And this all county information notice, ACIN, talks about that. All of these letters are available, and more letters are available on the California Department of Social Services websites. Under letters, there's a section that says letters and regulations. So anyway, let's talk about applying for IHSS. You can contact your local Department of Public Social Services and say you want to apply for the in-home supported services program. They're going to require that a medical provider fill out what is called the SOC 873 form. So all of the IHSS forms are numbered bottom left corner. And this is called the Health Care Certification Form. This information gets filled out, and authorization to release information. Licensed healthcare professional, what does it mean? Who could fill out this form? I remember a client calling, and she had submitted this form to the social worker, and it had been filled out by a psychologist, and the social worker rejected the form. And I said, let's look at the form. And we looked at the form, and lo and behold, a healthcare professional license includes a psychologist. So I said to the client, just go back to the social worker and show her the form and tell her that what you did was fine. And it worked. So anyway, the health care professional has to answer these questions. Is the person enabled to independently perform one or more activities of daily living? In your opinion, is one or more IHSS services recommended in order to prevent out-of-need home care? And so this gets filled out and submitted to the county. At some point in time, there's going to be a social worker who goes out to the home to assess the need for IHSS services. We have on our website what is called the self-assessment form, and all the links to all the forms are going to be available in the material, but the self-assessment form is a way for you to assess your needs. And the services are divided into different categories. We have domestic services, and underneath domestic services, it includes all of the services that are included under domestic services. We have related services. So what are related services? Preparing meals, meal cleanup, laundry, shopping, and other errands. We've got heavy cleaning and yard abatement are very special services. It's not something that you get every month or every so often. It's when there's a problem and you need the provider to do some heavy cleaning or clean out your yard, perhaps because you received a warning from the city that your yard is a danger. That would be a good time to call the IHSS program to get some yard hazard abatement. But then you've got all these non-medical personal care services like bowel and bladder care, respiration, bed baths, dressing, menstrual care, moving in and out of bed, grooming, etc. Care and help with prostheses, which includes medication. Like if you give the medication, if you sort out the medication and the person takes the medication, that would be personal care. Sometimes it could be considered paramedical services. And then we've got medical transportation, the yard hazard abatement, protective supervision I'm going to talk about, paramedical services that I'm going to talk about. So what you do with this assessment is that you work on it for a week and you decide what services you need help with, like what days of the week and how much time are you asking? So if you're asking for domestic services, what domestic services are you asking for? Is it only washing kitchen counters? Or are you asking for all of this or for some of it? And when you're asking for services, you've got to explain what service you need, why you need it, how much time you need, and why you need the time. If the starting point on time is a reasonable amount of time. If you're asking for a lot of time to do something, why are you asking for so much time than what would normally be the case? We in our series, we're going to go through a self-assessment worksheet that some of us prepared. It's different than this. So hopefully you guys will be able to attend that training so that you could see how to do an assessment. But this is a good starting point to learn about the services, because what you want to do is be prepared. So when the social worker comes to your home to do that initial assessment, and then she says, well, or he says, what is it that you need? You got to hand the self-assessment to them and say, these are the services, this is why I need the services, this is how much time I need, and this is why I need the time. It could be a lot of work to do the self-assessment, but in doing the self-assessment, like I'm going to teach you in another training, you're pretty much on your way to being prepared for a hearing, should you have to go to a hearing after you receive an unfavorable notice or something you don't like about the notice. So knowing the services are really important. So here in this one, preparing meals, we've got BLD, breakfast, lunch, dinner, but we're actually missing what I think is an important meal, which are snacks. I mean, some people eat 5 snacks a day because they have to. And you might say, well, that's just a few minutes. What does it matter? A few minutes a day, 7 days a week, 4.33 weeks in a month, that adds up. Now you're going to see, it says here, for example, domestic services are usually limited to 6 hours per month. If you need more than 6, you've got to show why. You're going to see on some of these services that they have hourly task guidelines. They have like limits, 6 hours for domestic services. For example, 60 minutes for laundry if you have facilities at home, 90 minutes if you have to go out. These are all guidelines. And if you need more time than what the guidelines say, then you can ask for more time. You just have to explain why you need more time. A lot of times the social workers won't explain that you can go above the guidelines. Sometimes the social workers will say to you, well, that's the most we can give you. Well, what they're referring to is the guidelines, but what they're not telling you is that there are exceptions to the guidelines for more hours and there are exceptions to the guidelines for less hours. Let me just give you a really clear example. A long time ago, I represented a gentleman who needed more than 6 hours a month for domestic services. We ended up going to hearing, and my client testified. We had medical evidence, and the judge awarded my client more than 30 hours in domestic services. I hope you remember this example as it can happen. You just need to make it happen and explain why you need more than the guidelines say. So this is the self-assessment packet that we have online. Like I said, there's another one that we also developed, which is much more, has a lot more information, and you cut and paste what you need. And if you attend that training, you'll know what I'm talking about. I wanted to talk about a few services in particular. One is protective supervision. Protective supervision is the only IHSS service where the program pays someone else to observe a person. Why? Because the person is non-self-directing, meaning that they have a mental disability, whether it be developmental, mental health, traumatic brain injury, dementia, any type of mental health disability that causes the person to be non-self-directing. What does that mean? That the person doesn't understand that the behavior they are about to do or are doing is going to cause them injury. So it's to protect their IHS recipient from him or herself. It's not to protect others from aggressive behaviors or to protect property from aggressive behaviors. It's all about supervising someone so they don't get into danger. So the California Department of Social Services put together an all-county letter in the year 2015. This is number 25 of that year, about protective supervision, clarifying things. Now there's a lot. This is the MPP. Remember the MPP, if you want, when you go to the regulations, you're going to see this information about protective supervision. And it's gonna tell you that, you know, you've got to be a person who is mentally impaired, mentally ill, and non-self-directing. And it talks about what that is. You have to be physically able to engage in dangerous activities. If you have no way physically of engaging in dangerous activities, then you're not going to qualify for protective supervision. You can be in a bed all day and still engage in potentially dangerous activities. That's really important. Behaviors that are not going to get you protective supervision is if you want protective supervision for friendly visits or other social activities. If the need is caused by a medical condition, a very typical example is you want protective supervision because the person has epilepsy and you want to make sure that you're there. So when there's a seizure, you can do whatever you need to do. That's in anticipation of a medical condition, and protective supervision is not for that. Prevent antisocial or aggressive behavior, not going to happen. Or to guard against deliberate self-destructive behaviors such as suicide. I think the operating words are deliberate self-destructive, that the person knows that they're doing, but you know, there are times where the person may be non-self-directing. But in any event, so there's a lot of good information here. This letter focuses a lot on minors, but a lot of this information is the same for adults. And so the criteria for both adults and children for protective supervision is the following. You have to have a mental disability that causes you to be non-self-directing. You have to have the physical ability to get into danger, and you have to require 24/7 supervision. The program is not going to pay for 24/7 supervision. It'll pay 1 of 2 hours. 195 hours a month for protective supervision, or 283 hours a month of protective supervision if you're severely disabled. And that's it. But it does require that the person need to be supervised 24/7. And there are like 740 some odd hours in a month. So obviously the program is not going to pay for all of that, but it does require that the person need 24/7 supervision. And the last criterion, which is only for children, for minors under the age of 18, is that you have to show that your child with a disability needs more supervision than a typical child, a child without a disability of the same age. That is, to me, the easiest thing to do, because when you start to talk about behavior of a 12-year-old that a 12-year-old typical child would not perform, because that child would understand that by performing that behavior they could injure themselves. That's the way you show. You start to talk about the behaviors that your child is having and compare those behaviors with a child of the same age without a disability. The child of the same age without a disability wouldn't engage in those behaviors because the child knows that that's going to be dangerous for the child. And that's it. The program also requires, well, I say requires because if an SOC 821 form, this is SOC 821, and this is the assessment of need for protective supervision. It's going to be filled out by a healthcare professional who is going to talk about the person's memory, orientation, and judgment, and ask a few other questions. It has to be someone who's licensed to practice in the state of California, physician or other medical professional. Now, it used to be that by checking this form, it's severe in all categories, perhaps it would automatically get you protective supervision. It doesn't do that anymore. This document, along with other evidence that the social worker will gather, will determine whether or not you get protective supervision. But remember, there's criteria to meet. So it's not enough just to have this form filled out severe in all the categories. That's not going to get you protective supervision. And if the county doesn't get this form, they'll just continue to evaluate protective supervision based on the other information that the social worker obtains. Now, if we're talking about children in special education, more likely than not, they're going to be asking for the IEP. If it's a regional center client, they're going to be asking for the IPP. So you have to be really diligent about making sure that the factual information in both the IEP and or the IPP are accurate. I'll tell you a story, and maybe you'll remember this for the next time you're about to sign an IEP, perhaps, or even an IPP. But so I had a mom who had applied for protective supervision for her son, and it was denied. When I was speaking to her, I said, well, what documents did you submit to the county? And she said, well, the IEP and the IPP. I said, send them to me. I want to see them. And in the IEP, it said, per mom, child only needs to be supervised while at school. Well, and she had signed the form, and she's a monolingual Spanish speaker, and the IEP was in English. And I said, well, I know why they denied protective supervision, because your son apparently doesn't need 24/7 supervision. And I read to her what it said in the IEP. And she says, well, I never said that. And I said, well, why did you sign the IEP? Because she felt forced at that moment to sign it. And they told her that down the line, they would send her a Spanish version. And she trusted that what was said in the meeting was actually in the document, the IEP. And I said, you know what? If you decide to appeal this, that's how you're going to explain it to the judge, the way you explained it to me, because I know that happens. And judges who hear these cases know that this stuff happens. The IHSS program is asking for documents, so you have to make sure that your documents say the same thing. If they say different things about a particular subject, then who's the social worker going to believe? Plus, if you've signed those documents and both documents are factually not correct in some way, it gets hard to believe when there's other information signed by the parent, perhaps, that has a conflicting information to what the parent has told the social worker. The other thing that the county is going to need is a 24 hours a day coverage plan. Although the IHSS program will not pay for 24 hours to 7 days a week supervision, it wants to know how this person is going to be supervised 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so this is where you would indicate how that would happen. And there are instructions here on how to fill it out. The other service that I wanted to talk about are paramedical services. Paramedical services are services that are required skill necessary to maintain the recipient's health. And the person would normally be able to perform the task, but for their functional limitations. So IHSS describes paramedical task as administration of medications, whether you put it in the mouth, you put it in food, you put it in a tube. If you just put it on the table or you separate it into, pill containers, that'll be personal care. Puncturing skin, inserting a medical device into an opening in the body, activities requiring sterile procedures or other activities requiring judgment based on training. This is really the definition of what a paramedical service is. And the county is going to require that the doctor fills out the SOC 321, and I'll show you that form in a moment. So these are examples of paramedical services, administration of medications such as crushing pills and putting medications in food, liquid or mouth, injections, gastric tube feedings, stoma care, tracheostomy care, skin wound care, catheter care, colonostomy, digital stimulation as part of the Bell program, inserting suppositories or other things like enemas, range of motion exercises. This is not an exhaustive list of what a paramedical service is, just examples of what they could be. Here we give examples of other things we believe to be paramedical services. So if you're wondering whether what you're asking for is going to be considered a paramedical service, then you have to answer the following questions. Was the service ordered by a licensed healthcare professional? Is it something that you would do except for your functional limitations? Is it necessary to maintain your health, physical or mental condition? Does the task involve any of these things? If you answer yes to all of this, then more likely than not, it will be a paramedical service. And so in this publication, there are also examples of when, for example, administration of medications is a personal care service and not a paramedical service. Range of motion exercise would be considered a personal care service under this scenario, but would be considered a paramedical service under another scenario. Or repositioning and rubbing skin. When is it considered personal care versus when is it considered paramedical? Respiration, same deal. Fingernail, toenail care. And so the form that needs to be filled out is, I'm just scrolling down to the form. You'll have all of this. The form is the SOC 321. It's the request for order and consent for paramedical services. Here at the bottom, like I said, all the forms, the left corner has the form number SOC 321, and it's filled out by a licensed professional. And the second page is where you would put the type of service, let's say range of motion, how much time is required to perform the service each time it's performed, let's say 30 minutes, how many times in a week, in a month, whatever, you put it here, frequency, and how long is the service going to be provided? Is it only going to be provided for the next 2 months, 6 months, or is it indefinite? And so this is the form that your doctor would fill out. Now, I want to say something about asking healthcare professionals to fill out forms. I don't think you can assume that these healthcare professionals know the programs that you're applying for. So if you're asking a doctor to fill out a protective supervision form, the SOC 821, the paramedical form, the SOC 321, give them information on what this is all about. What is the paramedical service? Give them the publication we just went through. If it's protective supervision, give them the all-county letter, or we have information on our website about protective supervision, because they need to know what the program is about, what the criteria is about, so that they can answer the forms appropriately. It's really important to educate the people you want to fill out forms about the program that you're applying for. If there's criteria, what the criteria is. I mean, when you talk about protective supervision, a doctor can think about, the doctor can just think, oh yeah, this kid needs to be supervised. And the letter could read, yeah, Emilio has been my patient for 5 years. He has autism and he needs to be supervised. That's not a really good letter. It's not even addressing the criteria for protective supervision. So educate your providers. I mean, your healthcare providers. So we're done with services. And now we're going to talk about what affects the hours that people get. And this is another publication that we put together. So IHSS has different funding streams, 4 of them. And so we call them programs. And so depending on what program they put you in will depend how many hours you could ask for, the maximum amount of hours that you can ask for. So there are 4 programs: the Personal Care Services Program, the IHSS Plus Option Program, the Residual Program, and the Community First Choice Option Program. When you initially got on IHSS, in the notice of action, it would have said you're on the PCSP program. No one really cares about that, because what they care about is what are the hours, like what are they going to give me, right? But it does matter depending on the program that they put you in, and you need to know that you might need to appeal and try to get onto another program. And I'm going to tell you why in a moment. But before we go to this chart, I want to explain what each program is. So if you're a parent provider or a spouse provider, parent provider of a minor child, a child below the age of 18, or a spouse provider of another spouse, you'll be placed in the PCSP program. The IPO program is for parent providers of minor kids, spouse providers. If you receive advance pay, I talked about that, or if you receive a restaurant meal allowance. So the program allows you to give up meal prep, for example, for a little bit of money every month. The program will send you the money, and then you don't get meal prep. I think the last time I looked at the amount, it was like $60 some odd a month for that. So if you fit under this, you're going to go on to the IPO program. The residual program is the only program where the federal government doesn't help to pay. And so this is a state-only program. And so this is for people who are lawful permanent residents, who are in that 5-year wait period before they can qualify for federal benefits, or what are called persons residing under color of law, or PRUCALs. And there are many, many categories of people who are residing under color of law. For those people, it's going to be the residual program. And the Community First Choice Option Program is for people who, if they were not living at home, they would meet the criteria to enter a nursing facility level of care as outlined in the CFCO program. There are a lot of people, children and adults, who are on the CFCO program. You don't have to go live at the facility. You just have to meet the criteria for entering the facility. And so it matters in the sense that, let's say that I'm placed in the PCSP program and I'm not severely impaired. Severely impaired is, and it's in this document, is defined as a person who requires 20 or more hours a week in any of the following categories, any of them: meal prep, meal cleanup, any of the personal care services, and or paramedical services. So if you're someone who gets 20 or more hours a week in any of those categories, you are considered severely impaired. But otherwise, you're not severely impaired. And so, let's say that I'm placed in the PCSP program and I need 250 hours of IHSS services. I can get the 250 hours of services if I'm not severely impaired, because under PCSP non-severely impaired, the maximum I could get is 283. Same if I'm severely impaired, I could get 283. Or if, let's say that I need protective supervision and not severely impaired, I'm going to get 195 hours of protective supervision. And let's say that I need 50 hours in other categories of services, I'll get that. I'll get the 195 plus the 50 hours as long as I don't surpass 283 if I'm not severely impaired. And the CFCO program operates the same way. Where it matters is if they put you in the IPO or the residual. So the IPO program, in the scenario where I need, let's say, protective supervision, and I'm not severely impaired 195, and I need 50 hours of other services, I'm not getting those 50 hours. The maximum I could get as a non-severely disabled person is 195 under the IHSS program. And so, the way to get out of this IPO program is to see if you may qualify under CFCO perhaps. And these all county letters talk about each program, the criteria for getting onto these programs. You can always call us if you can't find it, but you can do a Google search or go to the CDSS website to find these letters. Are all county information notice, all county letter. So in the IPO program, you're trying to get out of that program. So you might want to appeal your notice of action by saying, wait a minute, I shouldn't be in the IPO program. I should be in the CFCO program. Or try to increase the hours in the categories that could make you severely impaired: meal prep, meal cleanup, personal care, paramedical. The residual program works the same way. If you're non-severely impaired, the most you could get is 195 hours, period. End of story. Doesn't matter that you need other hours. It's because it's based on your immigration status. What I say to people is, you're not going to get out of this unless they've made a mistake about your immigration status. What you need to do is try to increase the hours in to make you severely disabled: meal prep, meal cleanup, paramedical, personal care. So not everyone who gets IHSS has the ability to get the maximum amount of hours. It depends on what program they put you in. Okay. Now, severity, remember, this explains what makes you severely impaired under the program. And you could read more on that. Now, two things that will affect the number of hours that you get or are able to get are called proration and alternative resources. So let's talk about proration. In the categories of domestic services, heavy cleaning and related services, meal prep, meal cleanup, laundry, shopping for food, errands, etc. In these categories of services, the county can prorate the services. If the IHSS provider is providing services to other members of the household who are not on the program, then the county will prorate. So let me give you an example. I live with another person and I've been given time for meal preparation. My provider makes my breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Well, guess what? The person I live with eats the same meal that my provider makes. The program is going to say, wait a minute, we're not going to pay the provider to make the meals to someone who's not on the program. So Maria, if your total need is 10 hours, that's your total need of meal prep, and you have someone who is eating the same meals that are being prepared by the provider, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, then we're going to prorate those hours. We're going to take the number of hours you need, which are 10, and divide it by the number of people who are benefiting from the provider. That's 2 in your case, you and the other person. So rather than getting 10 hours of meal prep, I'll only get 5. And that's how proration works. The other thing that is going to reduce your hours are called alternative resources. So if you're receiving IHSS-like services through another program, it could be through school, adult daycare, then those hours will be reduced from your total need. So for example, let's say that I'm given time for meal prep through the IHSS program, but 3 times a week I go to an adult daycare program where they provide me with breakfast and lunch. Well, those are IHSS like services that I'm receiving through the day program. And so the time that I get for those services are going to be reduced from my meal prep hours, probably from my meal cleanup hours also. And at school, if a child is receiving IHSS like services at school, like if the child is receiving time for feeding in IHSS and some of the feeding is done at school, that's an alternative resource, and that time will be reduced from the total need for feeding. So there's more here that you can see when you guys have more time to do that. So we've talked about not everyone can get up to 283 hours. It depends on what program they put you in. Proration and alternative resources will reduce the hours you finally get. And now what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of those tools that the social workers use in order to determine how much time they're going to give you. So we're going to look at functional index rankings, hourly task guidelines. I mentioned the guidelines early on in the training, but we're going to take a closer dive. The adapted Vineland social maturity scale, I'm not going to open up, but if you go to page 61 and 62 of this website, you'll find it. It just shows you what, it's a developmental chart. It shows you when a child typically develops and what things the child should be doing at certain ages. And we use that when we're representing kids at hearings to show, well, a child of this age, a typical child of this age can now use a fork. This child of the same age can't use a fork. And so it's part of what we use in our analysis to get time for kids. But let's talk about functional index ranking. So when the social worker, after having gone to do the home assessment, when the social worker is ready to work on your case, she is going to rank each service you have asked for. So let's say that one of the services that I asked for was meal prep, and I explained in great detail why I could not prep any meals. I cannot prepare my meals because of my physical limitations, perhaps. And I gave her a lot of information, medical documentation to support what I was saying. And so I wouldn't expect her to rank me 1 because that means I'm independent and I'm not going to get any time. Rank number 2 is the only rank where a provider gets time to provide guidance, reminders, to encouragement for the person who's receiving IHSS to do the task. So if I'm a person who forgets to eat, take my medication, bathe, I can have a provider. IHSS will pay for a provider to remind me to do these things. Note that the provider's not doing it. The provider's reminding me to do these things. Rank 3 means that I'm going to need some human assistance to do the task. Rank 4, I'm going to need substantial human assistance to do the task. And rank 5 is that I need total human assistance to do the task. And rank 6 means it's a paramedical service. So for every service you ask for, that service will be ranked. Your notice of action doesn't give you the rankings. It's that form that the social worker fills out to do the assessment that has the ranking that's in your file. And the rankings, I'll show you how the rankings are used in a moment. So these are the functional index rankings. First thing the social worker will do. The second thing the social worker will do is look at the hourly task guidelines. Now, you see service categories in blue. The different rankings are in different colors, with purple being rank 5. Rank 5, remember, rank 5 is total human assistance. And remember, I told the social worker that I needed total human assistance, and I told her that I needed 10 hours of meal prep. But if you look at meal prep service category and you cross over to rank 5, it says low is 7 hours a week, mid is 7 hours a week, high is 7 hours a week. This is just a guideline. And I get that notice of action, and she gives me 7 hours a week of meal prep. And I call her up and I say, why did you give me 7 hours? I had asked for 10, and I explained to you in detail why I needed 10 hours. And she says to me, Maria, this is all I can do. And I would say to her, I know you're referring to the hourly task guidelines, but like, you know, as well as I know, that there are exceptions for the guidelines. You could give me more than 7 hours if I explain it to you why I need it. And she could have given me the 10 hours if I gave her sufficient information, but she didn't. And she'll say to me when I ask her, well, why, after she says to me, well, it's the most I could do. And if you really are not happy, you could go to a hearing, and I'll say, fine. Or maybe the social worker will say, well, let me review this and see what I can do, whatever the case may be. So these are just guidelines, hourly task guidelines. You can have an exception for more. You can even have an exception for less than what the guideline says. So let's say, for example, meal prep consists of, you have for breakfast, toast and coffee. You have for dinner and for lunch, frozen dinners that are put in the microwave. Do you think it's going to take 7 hours to make those meals in the 7 days that is a week? No, it's going to be less than 7 hours to make those meals. And so in that case, the social worker could give you less than the 7 hours, because it doesn't take a lot of time to prep those meals, coffee and toast, nothing really. And heat up a microwavable meal, not that much. So these are the guidelines. Here you have domestic and related services, 6 hours. But remember, I got my client over 30 hours because I could show that there was an exception for more time. Shopping and for food, errands, etc. Same. These are the guidelines that there are time-wise. But again, if you need more time, you can ask for more time. Now, I want to talk about minor kids, kids below the age of 18, because when we're talking about kids, this is where you start your analysis. You start using this functional index ranking for minor children. You have to know the functional index rankings, right? 1 through 6. And when we're talking about 1 and kids, minors, 1 means 1 in the functional index ranking world means independent, but in the case of kids, it means they're not going to give you any time. But there's more to the story. But let's look at the columns first. Ages 0 through 17, housework, there's a 1 all the way down the column here. Laundry, you have some 1s up to the age of 13, and then you start having different rankings. These are the rankings that could be used for these services. Judges use this functional index ranking for minors. Social workers use this. But there are 2 very important things here under the notes. It says all minors should be assessed the functional index ranking of 1. Hold on, I need to, unless extraordinary need is documented. What does it mean, extraordinary need? It means when you're comparing when you're asking for hours for your child, you have to show that your child, so for example, in the area of laundry, that your child needs in the area of laundry more than a typical child would need in the area of laundry because of your child's disabilities, right? You have to compare your child of an age with a typical child of the same age. And what would a parent do for a typical child of that age? Extraordinary need is above and beyond that which a parent would do for a typical child, that's the above and beyond. That's the extraordinary need. So in a case that I did, where a child was 12 years old and he was still wearing diapers and had lots of accidents, and he loved to put his hand in his diaper and smear feces all over his body and everywhere else. His father testified at the hearing that he goes to the laundry 3 times, first to do his clothes and his child's clothes. Typical. That's what a parent would do, right? But then he said, I go 2 additional times because of my child's disabilities, and this is what he does. And so the judge in the decision said, the time that the father goes to do his laundry and the child's laundry, there's no extraordinary need. That's what a parent would do for a child anyway of that age. But those 2 additional times, that's an extraordinary need, because a parent with a typical child wouldn't need to go those 2 extra times, because the child doesn't have those disabilities, is not having those kinds of behaviors or accidents, right? So that's how sometimes social workers will say to parents, it's your responsibility. You can't get anything because it's your responsibility. They're not really explaining it correctly. Where you see a 1 here, you're not going to get any time unless there's an extraordinary need. Your child needs above and beyond what would be normal to give a typical child. That's how you have to look at this. And where you see like a 1 or a 6, it's either going to be a 1 or a 6. Or where you see that you can use functional index rankings from 1 to 6, like under bowel and bladder care for a 7-year-old or a 6, 5, 4-year-old. You can use the functional index rankings of 1 to 6. So this chart tells you what index rankings are available. And if there's a 1, you're going to have to show extraordinary need. But minors where the parents are providers of their minor kids, and they can't ask for housework, because it says minors who live with a parent provider must be assessed a functional index ranking of 1 in housework, regardless of extraordinary need. So parent providers, minor children where they have parent providers will never get domestic services. But otherwise, where you see a 1, you're going to have to show an extraordinary need above and beyond what would be done for a typical child of that age, the same age as your child. That's the way to do it. And this is where you start your analysis. Really important document. Elimination of, okay, so this is the all county letter about the changes to when a parent can be a provider of a minor child or a non-parent provider of a minor child. Essentially, a parent who, it used to be that a parent working full-time could not be a provider of a minor child, or a parent could work part-time but couldn't work full-time. But now, really, the parents, even full-time working parents, can be providers of minor kids, as long as they're not in the PCSP program. And this document will explain it. If the child is in the PCSP program, it's because the child's IHSS is being provided by a non-parent. So one of the things that this document says to counties is you need to start moving these kids from the PCSP program, if you can, to the CFCO program, to another program that will allow the parents to be the providers, despite the fact that they're working full-time. But if you're working full-time and you want to be the parent provider, you've got to also, you have to think about, well, what services am I providing my child? And are those services that I could be providing my child when I'm home? So for example, if your child is at home and you have a non-parent provider and the child is given bowel and bladder care, feeding, bathing, etc., and it's happening throughout the day while you're at work, well, obviously you can't be providing that service because you're at work, but what services can you be providing when you're in the home? Even if there's another parent provider in the house, I'm sorry, another parent in the home, that doesn't matter anymore. So the county is supposed to be changing, minors from PCSP into perhaps the IPO program or the CFCO program, where they can. If for some reason they can't move them out of the PCSP program, then it'll only be non-parent providers that will be able to provide care to the child. And that's about the MPPs on parent providers of minor kids is really no longer in place. But the other thing too is that it doesn't change the rule that in order to be a parent provider, you have to have work authorization to work in the US. If you don't, then you still cannot be a parent provider. You also have to worry about, provider overtime rules. You might be able to get an exemption to work more hours, but this talks about it. We also have a publication that talks about when you can ask for more hours than what the program allows when you're a provider. So this all county letter is an important letter, especially for parents who were denied being providers because they work full time. Well, now that doesn't matter. But if the child is in the PCSP program, we need to get them out of that program. If not, then they can only be provided IHSS services by a non-parent provider. And so the notice of action, this is a typical notice of action when someone is already receiving services. You're going to see the date of the notice. Let's say that the date of the notice is June 1st. Case name, number, who the social worker is, contact information. Here it says let's say it says as of July 1st, the services you get will, let's say that they're going to take away my protective supervision as of July 1st. If you read the notice in the back, it says, if you want your services to continue after the effective date of the notice, the effective date of the notice is July 1st. It's not June 1st. The date of the notice is June 1st. When the thing is supposed to happen is July 1st, because the notice says, as of July 1st, your protective supervision will be taken away. If I want that not to happen on July 1st, I have to appeal before the effective date of the notice, which is July 1st, and ask for aid paid pending. So when July 1st comes around, nothing will happen to my protective supervision, and hopefully I go to a hearing and I win my case. You might think, okay, that's easy enough to know, but I've talked to people who have received notices, and I've asked them, well, have you appealed? And they said, no, I don't know how. Well, then that tells me that they didn't read the notice completely, because the notice tells you how to appeal, where to appeal, how much time you have to appeal. You have 90 days to appeal from the date of the notice, but if you want aid paid pending, you have to appeal before the effective date of the notice. What is going to happen before that date? In my example, it was July 1st. So this rectangle here is really important. If you don't have aid paid pending, come July 1st, in my case, my protective supervision will be taken away, and it would be up to me to go to a hearing to get it back. So we've got different columns here. The services are listed on the first column. Second column is the total amount of service needed. This is your total need for each service you requested. What is it that Maria needs? Maria needed to prepare meals. I asked for 10 hours. And let's say that they gave me the 10 hours. So she believes that I need 10 hours in preparing meals. So she's going to put a 10. The social worker will put a 10 in the second column. But remember, the person I live with eats the same meals that's prepared by my provider. So what's going to happen is that the county is going to take those 10 hours in column 2 divided by 2, which is 5. So that'll be in the third column, and the remaining hours, which are also 5 and 5 are 10, will go in the fourth column. So the fourth column is after proration, what's left, right? The following column, services you refused, I've never seen anyone refuse services, or you get from others, those are alternative resources. This is where you'll find time taken away from the amount of service you need or the total amount of service needed if there was no proration. This is where the alternative resource hours will go, and the result will go into the now column here. What was, if you had hours in that service before, it'll be in this little middle column. And whether it was whether this notice increases or decreases the service hours in that category will be, you'll have a plus or a minus here. Note that domestic services are put in the notice on a monthly basis. The rest of the services are weekly. So when you add up the services, the weekly services, you times it by 4.33 weeks in a month. Then you add your domestic hours, because now we're talking monthly hours. And for those special services, you would put them here. Teaching and demonstration is for certain category of services where the program will pay, I think, up to 3 or 6 months for the provider to teach you how to do the service. What's the goal of teaching and demonstration? So that you no longer need the service. You're taught how to do the service, so you no longer need a provider to do it. So these are the time-limited services. So the last part of this is representing yourself at a state hearing. I'm not going to go over it. The last training that I do in this series, we're going to use a case example and show you how to get ready for a hearing. So I'm going to leave this with you guys to read. It's a publication from Legal Aid Foundation of LA. So we have come to the end of the presentation, and I'm happy to take questions at this time.
Let me go ahead and pause the recording, please, Maria. Give me 1 minute.